like we have part of our heritage is Sephardic from
Italy.
And yeah, Italy.
Right. Okay.
Italy.
Oh, it's to have
So,
something in
yeah.
common. I'm also Italian. Right.
Yeah, and we and also Scandinavian. So they moved to the west coast of
Right.
Schleswig-Holstein, which was um, the Danish emperors invited Sephardic Jews after the Inquisition,
Wow.
and they to settle them in a new founded city, which was to develop. They were allowed to buy land there, and they could develop
I did not know
businesses.
that. Fascinating.
So this is interesting. So and that's why we have a lot of Scandinavian heritage and
Interesting.
Italian and
Right.
yeah,
And German.
it's a
Oh.
mixture.
Right. That's the
Yeah.
Jewish story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's very also a story of a lot of resilience,
Yeah.
So we have challenges,
That's in the
for
DNA.
generations, And my ancestors are physicians also, from the Enlightenment,
Right.
times of Enlightenment. So,
Fascinating.
and that's we're very
How are you?
interested in. Good, how are you?
Perfect
Hiya.
timing.
Hi.
Very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. Let you catch your breath. Welcome, welcome.
I just
Yeah.
worked out you would
Thank
think I'm good to go, but
Good.
Glasses.
I trust you had a restful winter break.
yeah.
Good. Okie dokie. So, we're up to the presentation which relates to nurturing independence in our children, which is really the real goal of being a parent, is to help our children grow up and become their own entity on every level. Financially, do I really want to be spending the rest of my life working to support my kids? And after they're married, that makes no sense. Do I really want to spend the rest of my life trying to help my kids figure out their own problems? Or do I want to help inject in my children a clarity of a value system that as they go through their challenges, yeah, they can call for direction and some advice, but essentially independence means they can figure this out themselves. That's really what we're looking for. And it goes on every strata. So the concept of nurturing is in the word gidel, which I may have shared this with you before. It shares the same three-letter root as gadol. Gadol means great, but interestingly, it also means, what else does gadol mean?
Big, large.
Large.
Yeah.
And gadol has another meaning. Halakhically speaking, a child is called a katan. What's an adult? A gadol.
Yeah.
So the concept of a gadol is actually, when we say this person is an adult, what do we mean by that? It's just a specific age. What does that mean? This child's acting like an adult. What do we mean? Responsible for themselves.
Yeah.
So the correct translation, if you want to look for one, is the concept of our definition of greatness is independence. Sorry. We don't have one. Independence. This is really the goal of all parenting. Independence, to help my child become independent. How do we help the child become independent? So this is very it's very simple, even though it sometimes goes over one's head because of the simplicity of it. When I tell a child what's the right thing to do, that is one way of communicating. What happens if I give the child a question? What do you think is the right thing to do? And give them a menu. Is it A or B? What's the difference between those two?
Like interacting with the other, you're letting a child make a decision and learn on their own.
So I'm the
Take
one.
ownership over that thing.
So of those two, which is reflecting the goal of nurturing independence?
Exactly.
It's really asking the question. So questions are always the most powerful way to help grow a mind of a child. That's why in all the training in Montessori and certainly in Alpidanque, much of the interaction between teachers and students is actually question-answer format. And sometimes when a kid comes up with a really good question, the worst thing I could do as a teacher is answer it. Because sometimes that is appropriate, but there are other times where if you gauge that your child has the maturity to dig a bit deeper and possibly explore possible answers, then by throwing it back to the child, that's a great question. What do you think might be the answer? So this is how we help the child's mind grow. It's all about the mind of the child has been given to the parents as a seed. I brought here as a demonstration. Good afternoon. I brought here a date seed. I think I shared this with you once. I'm not sure. Did I share this with you?
No.
So okay, so here's a date seed. This is the seed of a date, and I'm going to ask you in the biggest possible way that you can expand the answer to the question: what is it capable of? What is this seed, which seems inanimate? It seems like it's got no brain of its own. It doesn't seem to be alive. What's this capable of?
Creating a whole tree.
Growing a whole tree of dates, and with those dates, what can come from there?
Feeding, nourishing,
N-
nourishing
nourishing.
humans, and then from the shade.
The shade, to provide
and then
shade.
oxidation, creating from the trees and the leaves.
So more and more trees can be grown from this original one seed.
Hearts
What-
of palm.
Sorry?
Hearts of palm.
Hearts of palm.
Wow.
And actually the palm wood is a very popular
Any
wood.
palm tree.
And it's a very strong wood. So
Building houses.
building houses. So is it possible if just speaking theoretically, if the world was starving, there was a drought around the whole world, and yet this one seed, could this one seed theoretically save the whole world? Yes or no?
Yes.
Could actually provide nutrition for the entire world. This one seed could provide housing, furniture, the wood that would be providing construction for an entire population or the entire world. Theoretically speaking, is that true?
Yes.
Is this one seed capable of providing transportation through building of boats from the same wood?
Yes.
So this is quite extraordinary. This is only one seed. And this seed has literally divine knowledge, so to speak, of what to do when it's placed in the ground. It can't do this everything on its own. It needs the right environment. It needs the soil. It needs rainfall. It needs gravity. It needs sunshine. It needs wind. All the elements in creation are needed in order to provide the right environment for this seed to be able to give of itself. So it's interesting that I know it's Tu B'Shvat tomorrow night, even though, and that's why we chose this title to coincide with that period of time. We're about to celebrate what's called the Rosh Hashanah of trees. What's the great celebration? What are we celebrating when we talk about the greatness of trees?
New life.
New life, starting again, the cycle of life. What else?
Sustenance.
Sustenance. What is Tu B'Shvat in terms of on the calendar? Why is it that date is the celebration of the new year of trees?
Start of spring.
It's the start of spring, which means that the ground has been sufficiently saturated from the rainfalls of the winter for the seeds in the ground to start growing again and create its own roots and shoots and eventually grow into a fruit-bearing tree or plants, etc.
Yeah.
So
And also, economically, it's important, because of it's really divided between the old season and the not new season of growing.
interesting.
Yeah. That's, I'm not. I'm just asking. I'm just asking.
You're asking that as a question? I'm assuming that's accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah. לחיים באנו כאן תא אדוני אלוהים מלך העולם שהכל נהיה בדברו. Thank you. So here's an interesting insight, because this relates to children and relates to adults as well. we're saying the word ligadel means to grow, and it comes from the word gadol. Gadol means adult, which in concept really means independence. So the whole purpose of parenting is to help this child become independent. Physically, we nurture the child till they're fully grown. Financially, we take care of the child till they can sustain themselves. Once they get married, now they're creating their own independent ring, so to speak, in the unbroken Musara of our nation. So that. The fact of starting a family is independently growing their own unit. There's a continuation of where they came from. So it's all about independence. There's a statement from Rav Nachman of Breslov who says it's very interesting. When you look at a tree may have a number of branches that say, oh my gosh, they're rotten. Some of the fruit may have been infested, and there might be fungus on some of the roots that are still on the surface of the ground. But do you still call it a tree, yes or no? Yeah, it's still a tree. So even with its defects, it's still called a tree. Then he expands that to, if you see a forest, and there are many trees, but you look at every single tree, they're not all the same. Every single one is different. Even if it would be the same, let's say olive grove or orange grove, no two trees are identical. No two trees grow exactly the same. I did this with the 4th and 5th graders today, where we started with the title that Hashem never repeats the same thing twice. Never. Even snowflakes, which the Eskimos have the most names for different snowflakes and snowfalls, they've got over 300 names for different snowflakes based on the type of fall. And you and I think we can come up with, well, there's hard snow, which has got more water in it, and then there's soft, which has more air inside the snowflakes. And so one is a heavy snowfall, one's a light one. But after that, I don't have that many too many. You got sleet, you got hail, etc. But there's no two snowflakes that are the same. Once put under a microscope, we can take two snowflakes from the same snowfall, and they won't have the same crystallization. Once they crystallize at a certain temperature, they have a different shape. So there's no two items in the entire Bria, in the entire creation, that's identical. No two faces the same. Even though we each contain the exact same parts of our metabolism in terms of two lungs, kidneys, we've got a heart, etc. No two people are the same. In energy, everything's different. So I asked your daughters this morning, what's Hashem's plan in having no two things the same? They came up with some great answers. Obviously the one that they all concurred with was that Hashem celebrates variety. But here's the insight, which I thought was very interesting. Even though a tree has defects, it's still called a tree. Even though a forest, amongst all the trees, every single one you can find something wrong, inverted commas, with it, but it's still called a forest. And the Torah goes out of its way to call Adam, ki Adam eitz hasadeh. The human being is called the tree of a field. Why? What's the parallel? Now, then we're going to jump into parenting. What's the parallel between a human being and a tree? We said that this one seed has the divine information to create enough nutrition for the whole world. You can get date syrup. I don't know how many of you are fans of date syrup. It's beyond delicious. It's so sweet and yummy. Even the Torah, which talks about entering a land which is halav udvash, it's zvat halav udvash. It's pouring, dripping with halav, which is referring to goat's milk, by the way, not cow's milk. And it's also referring to honey, not bee honey, but actually date honey. It's not referring to bee honey. That's not what it's referring to at all. Bee honey is actually maybe not always the most healthy of honeys, but date syrup is very nutritious. So in the same way that this one seed is capable of feeding the entire world and providing furniture, housing, and even firewood. I wouldn't say that's best wood to use for heating the home, but yeah, this potentially can provide heating for every single home in the entire world. So the potential is beyond. So this gives us a different reverence for this seed. But the seed that's planted into the Isha, that becomes the child growing inside the womb, that with the cut of the umbilical cord, now goes through many different stages of independence. It's finally physically independent of its mother, but totally dependent on its mother to be fed. But as soon as it becomes weaned, it's into a whole new stage where it's now feeding, might not be feeding itself, but it can eat actual solid foods. And then it goes to a point where, as the child becomes familiar with their muscles, they are able to drag their body along as they crawl, eventually lean against a surface to stand, fall many times till they can actually stand without falling, and then the next step is the next step, and then they fall again hundreds of times, and at each point is a new stage of independence. And my goal as a parent is to nurture that, to, as you know, mommy and daddy, the first time your firstborn stood for the first time. I don't know if you had cell phones then, but you called your husband, who was in the middle of a multi-million-dollar deal, and said, "You're not going to believe it. Hannah stood for the first time." I said, "Really? Oh, that's awesome. What's the big deal? It's nowhere near the end of the process of independence, but it's a celebration because they're on schedule. They're on target. They're getting there. And that's what deeply we know is when this child's mind grows in the first 2 years, we've mentioned before, of total silence except for pain and hunger, the child is not talking. But after the child has collected enough thousands of words and images and sounds that the mind is connecting in those very busy years, the mind is very busy, eventually starts articulating. It's not easy to figure out how to take this sound I do know, mummy, and then open up my mouth to start the m part of mummy, and then a little bit larger to say for the ma part, and then close it for the me, and then open it again for the e part of the. And there's a lot of work involved in the movements inside the mouth. All this is part of the nurturing of the eventual independence that the child can independently say no as one of their first words, or whatever sentence that starts to come out of their mouths. And my goal is to respect that there's a process here, and there's nothing wrong with, I know not everyone would agree with this, but there's nothing wrong with the child being delayed with speech. There might be somewhere later down the line, but it's not my place to become panicky and assume that something's wrong with my child. How many times have we seen a child not open their mouths for 2 or 3 or sometimes up to 5 years old, but it doesn't mean their mind there's something wrong. They've been gathering information for whatever reason, and it may not be related to trauma. It may simply be that this child, for whatever reason, is collecting information and thinking about it, and is more in the world of thought than verbalizing. And when they are ready, when they start verbalizing, it's mind-blowing the thinking that's behind the sentences that comes out of their mind, out of their mouth. I have actually seen this on more than one occasion. It is astonishing that children don't become speakers, talkers at the same age. They don't become readers at the same age. One of the problems we have in society today is that we have actually created something called scope and sequence, which is a very dangerous, inherently dangerous way of grading children. By first grade, you're supposed to know the Aleph base. By second grade, you're supposed to be reading Chumash fluently, accurately. This age, you should know this amount of vocabulary, etc., or you should be up to here in math. And it's not really accurate because the mind of every child is a seed of extraordinary potential. I once had, when I first started a Jewish Montessori school in Clifton, New Jersey. So we began, the first 3 years was just preschool. So in those 3 years, I was teaching Aleph base to the preschoolers. And then when it came to first grade, I was the Rebbe. And the second grade, I became the Rebbe of the first and second grade combined. It was a Montessori model. It was fascinating that in my first grade, I had not one, but 2 boys enter first grade because of the way math is taught in Montessori with physical beads that are color-coded and reflect quantities, which is much easier even for adults. I fell in love with math for the first time in my life. When I took my training in Montessori, I hated math till then and didn't realize I didn't hate math. I just wasn't taught it in a way that I could understand it. So I ended up hating something I can't make sense out of. On that score, by the way, I want to say to the mathematician who discovered zero, thanks for nothing. So it was fascinating to me that I had two kids in my class enter first grade and they were multiplying 3 digits in their mind. Not on paper, they passed that. That they were in the abstract, they were able to identify the quantity of these two numbers and the multiplication of those against each other. It was astonishing. And it wasn't because they're geniuses, it's because at a young age they were exposed to math in a way that made sense to children. And how's that work? When you introduce math as concrete, because that's the world children live in, until they are familiar with symbols. Math digits are symbols. Letters of an alphabet, be it Hebrew or English, they are symbols. And they represent sounds in language, and numbers are symbols that represent quantities. So there are plenty of children that they have to memorize their times table or their addition table, but they don't understand the relationship between 3 plus 3 plus 3 is the same as 3 times 3. That multiplication is actually addition on a, if you want to say, exponential level. And so without understanding that, they have to memorize the concepts of how they're taught. But when you learn it in concrete, because that's the world they live in, they don't know that table is a table. But they do know this is a table, and they've got that word inside their mind. They know this is a chair, even though they cannot spell it. So when children are developing in their process of nurturing their mind to become sufficiently familiar with all the physical objects in the world around them, and then they're introduced to an alphabet of actual physical letters. That's what they do in preschool. Your Jonathan is familiar with that. Yeah. You've got Hebrew alphabet letters and English alphabet letters, and they're made of beautiful wood, and they're very nicely painted. It's attractive, but that's entering the world of the child. That's why it works. So that the child, when they touch in the world of sensorial interfacing, the child touches a letter, and then they're given the name for this letter or the sound for the letter. There's something to associate to this physical item. Now I understand you're telling me it's got this name or sound, or name and sound. That is a lot easier than me putting a letter on the board and telling the children this is an aleph.
Yeah, that's true.
But when the child can actually feel the aleph, and when they're told this is a base, this is a gimel, etc., and what ends up happening, which I'm showing that when the parent, or the teacher in this case, understands that children are consistently in the process of nurturing their minds. And it's not about you're supposed to be able to do this by now. Because that's locking my child into where I think they're supposed to be. And when I've got the reverse of that, I've got a gifted child in the classroom who might be multiplying 2 or 3 digits in their mind, and then I say, that's not what we're doing in this year. We're still doing addition. So what ends up happening is if I cap the kid who's ready for much more, and I'm not putting down the system outside of Alpidarco and Montessori, but it's an economical system. It's not based on child development. It's based on how do you fit 20 plus kids in a single classroom with one teacher and somehow figure out how do you get them all to learn the same math, the same language acquisition, same textbook, all on the same page, when in reality every single child is in a different place and ready for something else, and other kids are gifted in other areas and it's not reflected in this classroom, so the child can't learn in their strength in Alpidarco, so it creates unfair challenges, and then the fingers are pointed at the child for being the problem, as opposed to I'm limited in my understanding of children and limited in helping the child develop according to where they are and build on that, as opposed to where I think they're supposed to be based on the class age. So the reverse of this is when you've got a gifted child who's really is ready for much more, and I cap them. You can't go that far in the curriculum because that's not the scope and sequence of this grade. What I'm really doing is I'm actually nurturing in the mind of a child hatred towards the subject, which he becomes so bored with, and he's so ready for much more challenge and much more stimulation, but I can't provide it in the classroom. I was recently, I'm not sure if I shared this with you, I don't think so, but I was recently in Ziek van der Zeke van der Hoek school in the Bronx. He bought a school in the Bronx, over 1,000 kids, mostly blacks and Hispanics. So it's not. I'm just making that as a statement, so you can understand that most of these kids don't know if their father is their real father. Some of them are in prison. Some are not alive. It's not a place where the children's home is putting education as a priority. He sold his business many years ago, his software programs, a religious Jew, and he bought himself a public school. He turned it into a charter school. It's the same type of kids, same population, and he went from 40% of the children on medication to 5%. He went from children being thrown out of school every month. There's a kid that's being thrown out of school, to one kid in 10 years was thrown out of the school. How do you do it? So I'm just going to give you an example of what can happen, and it's not the kids. It's us adults who can plan it, design it so much better that our kids' minds can develop to become nurtured the way Hashem actually wants us to be, which is independent thinkers. So what he did was very simple. It's quite astonishing. He offers a starting salary for a teacher for his school of $140,000. That's starting salary. So can you imagine how many applicants you're going to get if the starting salary is 10 years ago, $140,000, and the promise of if you get rehired each year, because you only have a 1-year contract, and the reason why is because there's a criteria for being rehired the next year, and there's bonuses. It's up to $25,000 bonuses. Can you see that might be attractive to someone who wants to really be a good teacher? So it's very interesting. He would get hundreds and hundreds of applicants for that type of salary, and now he gets to choose the best teachers, and he gets to also choose the best candidates for teaching this model, and then he gives them the best possible training on what's called master teaching. It's really quite fascinating. So I went there a couple of weeks ago, and a few weeks before then, to 2 of the different campuses with a friend of mine who was trying to work on how to revamp our system based on the success of this school. And it's quite fascinating because what we saw is that these master teachers have, and I kid you not, up to 32 children in the classroom. They probably have an assistant teacher. We've got 32 kids in the classroom, and it's a broad range of abilities in that classroom. We've got gifted children, and you've got some kids that are literally on the autistic screen. It's astonishing. Now that particular child will have their own shadow, but the rest of the class learn how to get along with different kids in the class. That's something that Rabbi Bender does in his yeshiva in Darchei Torah. He started right from the beginning. He took children with various mental developmentally behind abilities and physical disabilities, and he would have them in the same classroom. They would have a para or a shadow, but it was to teach the rest of the kids how to get along with different people and don't look down on someone, and then they learn to celebrate that child's successes. So what I want to bring out though is really the following. The teachers for 140,000 plus starting salary, they have to be extremely well prepared for every single lesson. And what ends up happening is really quite fascinating. The teachers are audited by 3 entities. Their co-teachers, the head of school, and the students. And based on the 3 times a year audit will be whether they get rehired. So they started this at a very high level of leverage, whereby we're going to only attract teachers who are willing to work really hard, and we want to give them a livable salary. I'm not sure if 140 is a livable salary today, but we want to give them enough money that they don't have to take on other jobs in the afternoon or in the evenings to support their families, because what they're getting in school is not enough. And the children are the ones who suffer. And when the children suffer because it's not a master teacher who knows how to reach so many different types of kids in the same classroom, the easiest solution to the kid who's falling behind, or the one who's bored because haven't got enough stimulation on the other end of the classroom, the easiest thing to do is blame the kid. The easiest thing is that you're not paying attention. I think you might have ADD or ADHD. And you might need medication. And before you know it, teachers who aren't really qualified in that domain are making recommendations to the school's own on-staff therapists and psychologists to medicate the children before we've even exhausted. Well, what did you try before you came up with this diagnosis? Was the kid bored at the first day of school? Oh, this only developed as they fell behind because they missed school for 3 days and there was no way to catch them up. So there's so many interesting protocols that in the classroom that the teacher has, and it blew my mind that this young teacher in his early 30s had such control over the class, and it wasn't classroom management. You had desks very similar to Montessori, where you had 4 or 5 kids max around a desk, and you have all these desks in a classroom. Was even a trailer in that particular school I'm mentioning right now. So it wasn't a very large room, and the kids were completely engaged because he asking them all the time different questions and having them discuss between them what they think the answers are and write them down and then share their answers. That's just one strategy, but I'm just giving you an example of how when children are understood that no child is the same, every seed is different and is capable of creating a different type of tree, a different quality of fruit, a different type of fruit, because every seed is different. Could be an orange seed, could be a date seed. But the point is that every child, if I'm looking at them as you belong in this grade because your body was born on planet Earth on September I don't know what the cut-off date is anymore. Therefore, you are in this grade. And so we don't even look at the possibility of having multiple grades because children anyway are not all the same in one single classroom. They could all be born on the same day and you'd still have the same range of 3 grades of intelligence, academically, emotionally, socially, on all levels. And so it's almost actually fake education that we've chosen a model to put all the children in the same classroom of the same age within a certain 1 year range. That is really an artificial system. It's good for economics, it's not good for kids, because that's not who kids are. Nobody in this room is like wondering, well, how old is the other lady in this room? You know, no one's thinking like that. Because at a certain point of adulthood, everyone has an intrinsic appreciation that everyone has different skills and different strengths and different weaknesses, and I don't need to judge you based on that. So how old you are is just a statement of how many years your body has been on planet Earth, but it's not a statement of anything else. It doesn't tell me how wise you are. It doesn't tell me how much life experience you have to offer, just because, and you might be a lot younger than me, but you might have a lot more life experience that you've gleaned, and instead of believing that this person believes they are a victim or a scarred for life, and it's because of their parents or their schooling or this particular teacher or being bullied by this particular kid and never recovered and I'm still in recovery. And instead of going there, the child became so much more mature because of what they went through and became stronger because of it. So the school system that we have that is pegging children according to age is almost going against the whole concept of nurturing children. But the great news is children are going to grow up anyway, despite the school they go to, despite the friends they had or didn't have, and even despite sometimes the parenting, the great parenting or not great parenting that they had. Everyone eventually grows up because everyone has got the same divine intelligence that's already inside them that will give them the chance to exercise the greatest element in creation, free will. I can always change my mind. I can always change my thinking. We mentioned in one of the classes today that when you're nurturing a child to become a gadol is adult or independent, it's interesting that the letter gimel, when spelled out, means give, as in goimel. Gimel means give. It also means camel. And it also means to stop giving. So it means to give and it means to stop giving. As in Vayigamal, when Sarah in chapter 21 gave birth to Yitzhak, it says Vayigdal Hayel, the child grew, Vayigamal, and she weaned him. Oh, so the same word gomel means to give in order to nurture and grow, and also means to stop giving. I think we mentioned this earlier. What's the purpose of God choosing a word that has two opposite meanings?
Give them independence.
The purpose of giving is to give them independence. And the most powerful way to do that in the home is probably in every interface that we have with our child is how we answer questions and how we answer them. Because instead of talking, which I sometimes think really is that's my job, I'm here to tell you what's right and what's wrong. And there is room for that. I'm not taking away from that at all. But in order to nurture the mind of the child, can I work on a different trust level that this seed has incredible intelligence? This child has incredible intelligence. And that instead of me telling them how to grow, is it possible that if I give them choices in the questions I ask, that they will make the right choices? So you've got 12 years for a girl, 13 for a boy. Boys were a little bit slower, but the girls mature a little bit earlier. Oh, so you've got 12 years to train the mind of the child to the point where after 12 for a girl, 13 for a boy, they are responsible for their choices. But up until now, the responsibility is actually on mum and dad. And maybe to some extent, maybe teachers. But what is that responsibility? To tell them what's right and what's wrong? So there is a yes to that. That's what the Torah does. There's halacha, there's Targum mitzvahs, there's what's right and what's wrong. But then there's a whole big domain which is way beyond Targum mitzvahs. And that is, even though Targum mitzvahs is the skeleton of everything, Targum mitzvahs are the headlines. The headlines of what's right and what's wrong. The application of the headline depends on every single individual scenario. Every single individual's background, where I'm coming from, what I'm ready for, what I'm not ready for. And that is the domain of mommy and daddy, who hopefully we've got our fingers on the pulse of where our child is holding. So it's very much in my domain to be responsible for observing my kids close enough to understand their strengths and weaknesses and work with that, as opposed to figure out how do I get my kid to be like so-and-so? How do I get my kid to be like the rest of the boys or girls in his or her class? Because even the thought of that is completely misunderstanding that God created this seed to become its own. It's not meant to be a clone. And that's why nothing in the whole Bria, in the entire creation, is repeated. Nothing. No two water molecules are the same. When you crystallize 2 drops of water that came from the same rainfall under a microscope, you will see a crystallization of 2 complete different forms. There's no 2 items, no 2 leaves are the same. There's nothing that's repeated, because God wants to make it glaringly obvious that whatever you look at in creation, you're going to see variety. You're going to see everything's unique. In order that when we look at the most unique creation of all, which is mankind, human beings, we've got a chance of looking at each human being as unique in their past, unique in their present, and unique in their contribution for the future. So, asking questions to a child is huge. Not answering questions to a child is even bigger. By asking the child, what do you think the answer is? And then that becomes a discussion. What ends up happening is the more the child understands, oh, mommy, daddy respects my mind, respects and trusts I can figure this out on my own, the more articulate they become, more confident they become, because why is confidence correlated to mommy and daddy trusting by throwing the question back to the child?
They're capable.
You're capable of coming up with a solution yourself. So I will give you, let's say, a couple of scenarios in the world of discipline, where I will easily fall into the trap of thinking, part of my job as mummy, part of my job as daddy, is I'm here to be policeman daddy, policeman mummy. And that means that when there's a some sort of argument between siblings, and one's coming crying to me, Michael called me a name, and then if I'm partial, which is a dangerous thing and it's very hard not to be, but if I'm partial to the youngest kid in my family, or I'm partial to a particular kid, and I've been there, and my kids have told me years later who I was partial to, and helped me see what I was doing when I unfairly arbitrated a situation in favor of one of my kids who happened to be, they all I love, but one looked cuter than the others. So, for whatever reason, I actually believed their claims over and above the other two who were older than him. And it's only years later that he came clean and admitted that he was manipulating. And I was the victim of the manipulation, so were my two older boys. Thank God they get on very well, but what I'm bringing out is that it's not unusual for Yaakov Avinu to have a strong affinity to a particular child, in this case Yosef, where it was so strong that the other kids felt it. And their interpretation of that affinity was that you prefer him over us and you will believe his word over ours. And that became unfortunately a huge disaster where his Lashon Hara, Yosef's Lashon Hara, was accepted by, was seen as, in the eyes of the brothers, as he's a manipulator. And all he is, this brother of ours, he's brilliant. He's another Yishmael that Avraham Avinu could not wrap his mind around until God told him, listen to your wife and throw him out the house. And another Esav, who Yitzhak had as one of his twins and was more partial to Esav than his own Yaakov, who was the sweetest and most gentle and easy child. And Esav loved his father deeply, so much so that our sages actually say that Esav, when he went hunting on a daily basis to get his father's favorite foods, he was risking his life with wild animals, and for that he was rewarded that all the children and great-grandchildren of Esav until today have the schus of his kibbut av v'eim, and that's why they got the upper hand for the most part over the Jewish people, because we haven't been moser nefesh to the same extent. We have not sacrificed for loving our parents as much as Esav did, which is extraordinary, and that's what gives him the upper hand. That's what's actually brought in a number of Mefarshim. But going back to the point is, when I favor one kid over the other and I'm not aware of it, I'm in danger of hurting my children. And I'm also in danger of becoming an arbitrator, where I think my role is to protect this particular kid over and above the others. So how do I get out of falling into that trap in the first place? So I'm just going to share with you a very simple method. It's actually based on Rambam, and it's very, very simple. It's the mitzvah of tochacha. The mitzvah of tochacha, unfortunately, we're stuck with other translations which translate it as reprimand or rebuke. And you can hear I think the connotation in the word reprimand or rebuke doesn't have a connotation of a soft, gentle voice and very loving and endearing. Has the connotation of upset, possibly angry, and maybe even disappointed when I rebuke you or reprimand you. You hear that? So unfortunately, neither of those two translations are really accurate and don't reflect the intent between the word tochacha. Tochacha, Rashi tells us several times, Perek Kaf Daled, Kaf Hey, in Bereshis, tochacha is a language of birur dvarim, clarifying matters. Clarifying matters means, okay, let's put the pieces on the table and figure this out together. What's right, what's wrong? Let's get as much evidence that we think is relevant and needed, and then we can figure out how to move forward. So, for example, when a child comes and complains to me about what a sibling did, then I might be partial to want to believe them over and above and discipline the other one. And then what ends up happening is the child who complained learns that by complaining, I get my older sibling in trouble, and that's a form of bullying to the older kid. The older kid will resent me for a long, long time. I had this in my family. I was 1 year and 10 months old when my sisters were born, but I only had one sister come home, and then 3 weeks later, the other one, who was an incubator, came home. I didn't know I had twins, and my parents told me. I looked at the first one, and the second one, and I said, another? So apparently I never really recovered, because for the next 10 years, is it almost to the day, for the next 10 years, I teased, I don't want to say the language, I teased my sisters real bad. I was so not nice to them, pinching them and running out the room, so my mum would run in and didn't know why this twin was crying. I was a terrible tease. And this went on until I couldn't take it anymore, for the simple reason that I got in trouble every time. Why did I get in trouble? They were 2 innocent little girls, younger than me. I'm the Bukhar, the oldest, firstborn. I should set us an example. I should know better. And that speech echoed in my ears so much that I became so resentful that I hated my sisters for 10 straight years. It got so bad that I went to bed crying one night, and I even remember the sensation of the tears on my pillow against my cheeks as I was moving my head. I was so broken, I felt like I had no solution to my life. My life was just one big, no matter how many fights I win with my sisters, I lose every time. So I remember saying to myself, how am I going to solve this problem? To me, as a 10-year-old, this was a huge dilemma. So I remember the first thing that came to my mind is, if I killed one of my sisters, I even chose the weapon, I knew which one I preferred and didn't like the most. So, and then I realized, wait, one second. My parents were not going to see the funny side of this. I could end up in jail, who knows what. It's probably. So I completely dumped that. And then when I realized I couldn't kill, it's a 10-year-old. It's not how boys sometimes think. Don't do it. Some of you are saying, uh-oh. I found myself crying uncontrollably for the first time in my life to my Creator. And I wasn't raised religious in the typical sense, in terms of an observant home, but I was raised believing in God, and my mother was very emphatic, even warning me that when I go to school, if my science teachers would be atheistic, which all of them were, always know that God is real, no matter how much they try to prove to you that this world came about on its own, etc. So it's interesting that she told it to me with such certainty, but with also such love from a mother, that it really penetrated. And I remember I did get into some arguments with my teachers. It was a very interesting school. They actually encouraged kids to have their own voice. It was the most progressive school in world history at the time. It was a very interesting school. I'll tell you about it another time. I may share a couple of insights. And almost all the kids in the school, in my class, we were encouraged to have a voice. So the more out of the box you were, and the more off the charts, the more acceptable you were. So we had quite a few communists in our class, even though their parents were huge capitalists. And I was very popular because I was the best soccer player in the school. I was by far not smart in the class. I was below average on almost all subjects, except for English literature a bit and history. Otherwise, I was really, really poor. So I had a very low self-esteem growing up as an academic child, but I was good at soccer, and in England that's the national sport, so it really helps to make you popular. But besides that, I was weird, and the more weird you were, the more accepted you were. At the age of 11, I became religious, because when I was crying on that pillow, I made a deal with God. I said, God, please, you're the only one who can save me. Give me a brother, and it will even up the odds. It'll be 2 against 2. It's just not fair. It's 2 against 1. I lose every fight. Physically, I win every fight, but my mother always gets me in trouble for it. My father, when he gets home, I get told off. It's not. Please, I can't take it anymore. I need a brother. And for me to know that it's you answering my prayer, I asked a special deal. I said, give him on my birthday. So that's a separate story. I'll share that maybe another time. But the point was that when my brother was born, almost on my birthday, and it was only years later that I found out he was born on my Hebrew birthday. He was born a few days earlier than my English birthday, so I thought God was out by a little bit, but it was so close. And it was a boy, and that was what mattered the most. I had no clue, as a child at 10 years old, asking for a brother, that by the time he'd be any use to me, I would have grown out of teasing my sisters. But it was fascinating that I ended up in a decision, one-time decision. I'm going to stop cold teasing my sisters, because now I have to keep my part of God's deal, which is if he gives me a brother, I promise to be a good Jew. I had no clue how hard that is until today, how easy it would be for God to deliver on his part of the deal. But what it did do to me is it made me want to be a better Jew, and in that moment I said, I got to stop being nasty to my sisters. So I stopped cold. But what's interesting to me is that for me, the worst trauma, I wouldn't have used that word, but today you can, the worst agonizing difficulty growing up was that my mother favored my sisters, and my sisters ruined my childhood, when in fact what happened was that because of that frustration, I ended up praying for a brother, God delivered, and I ended up becoming religious because of that. So actually, I could have easily grown up saying, you know what, I'm so resentful to my parents. They put me in a secular school that is the worst value system you could ever imagine. They ruined my life, and I had sisters who I couldn't stop. I hated them so. And I could get stuck there to the point where I can't grow beyond. And then when I'm the victim, it's everyone else's fault why I can't grow up. And that's what we don't want our children ever to have. So how do I help not fall into policing my kids? I think the simple answer, I'm going to wrap it up in just a few moments, and that's the following, because it's ridiculously simple. Don't get stuck in more than 2 generations of crimes. That means when Chaim comes and complains about Hannah, and you love Hannah, or let's say you love Chaim because he's the youngest and he's very, very cute. He's so cute, it's ridiculous. So when he complains about Hannah, who's 2 years older, you easily take Hannah's side. So he complains that Hannah called him a name. So I call over Hannah and I scream, Hannah, come here! So already, you can see, I'm taking sides. And she's tearing. What? Said, did you call your brother an idiot? Yes, because he smashed up my Play-Doh. I don't care, you never call him an idiot. You understand? You're ruining his first self-esteem. Or whatever it is. The problem is, here's the problem. The moment I'm taking a position of judgment, I've already failed both of them. Because I'm teaching one that I'm going to take sides, and then I'm teaching the other that manipulation works. And then I'm teaching them in the wiring of their mind that the way to get through life is to be better at convincing the adult that you're interfacing with, whether it's a teacher or menahel or principal or father or mother, whoever's the dominant adult, how do I get to convince them of my position over the other person's, even if I'm not accurate and exaggerate or even lie. And that's the worst place I should be going in my mind of how to survive life. So another way, which is ridiculously, it's embarrassingly simple, is ask Chaim, what's the problem, Chaim? Hannah called me an idiot. Okay, Hannah, is it true you called him an idiot? Yeah, that's because he smashed my Play-Doh. I worked so hard on it. Chaim, is it true you smashed his Play-Doh? Yeah, Hubland, yes, that's because he's always calling me names. Don't go past the first 2 crimes. Because there's no way that if I find out, is it true you're always smashing his Play-Doh? She'll say, yeah, but that's because, and then it's going to go back to when they're both in preschool and she was trying to protect him and he said, stop it. She was so upset, and eventually it goes to regression therapy where you find out which guilty they were in the There's no end. There's no end to find out who's guilty or more guilty. It's impossible to measure that. The only thing you can do in really helping them become independently able to take care of themselves is ask, so Hannah, did you do the right thing to call Chaim an idiot? So, no, but he broke my... He did not do the right thing there either, but did you do the right thing to call him an idiot? No! So, when you do the wrong thing, what should you do? Say sorry. Okay. Chaim, did you do the right thing to smash her Play-Doh? No, but that's because she's always calling me... But did you do the right thing to smash her Play-Doh? No. So what should you do if you do something wrong? Say sorry, good. So get them to simply say sorry to each other. In some cases they'll be able to hug, or even if it's appropriate to kiss on the cheeks, and then just go back into life. Children are resilient. They don't live with lots of memories of resentment. Us adults, unfortunately, have much better memories, but Hashem made children got short memories for a good reason. None of us in this room could repeat our entire childhood of the first 10 years. I don't think if you were given an hour to speak non-stop about the first 10 years of your life, I think we'd all have a bit of a difficulty. We could talk a few memories here and there, but a lot of that is actually forgotten, and there's a good reason for it. Hashem wants that children can be resilient and move on, and not get stuck in what's wrong with the tree, what's wrong with the forest. There's nothing wrong. Every human being is perfectly imperfect. That's exactly how we're supposed to be. So nurturing children has to do with don't get stuck in their world. Meet them on the first generation of crime. Get them to admit the way they handled the problem, smashing the Play-Doh, calling a name, was not correct, so that they can solve it right there instead of analyzing I don't know how many generations of crimes behind. Well, that's because she. And now that's because, and before you know it, you've got all this evidence, and you've been pulled into a position that is not healthy for all of us of arbitrating. I'm now the Dayan. I'm supposed to be the head of the Beis Din in the court of law to decide who's more right, who's more wrong, and that is a guaranteed failed formula. The best thing I can possibly do is help them deal with how they handled their response to what they didn't like. So as they get better and better in that, and that's why they're in our homes till they're independent, 36 years or so, okay, 20 years, well, however long it is, but they're in our homes for long enough that we've got thousands of chances to help them not analyze the past generations, but get how did you handle this? Was that the best way to handle it? What would be a better way? And if they're not ready because they're emotionally so upset, say, look, if now's not the right time to answer the question, I'll revisit in how many times? Do you want 5 minutes, 10 minutes? And you just give them ways to regulate their own. Right now, they're too emotional in the drama of the Play-Doh, which they spent so long on. These are simple ways to help the child become independent in how they handle things that happen to them. Instead of analyzing, this person did that before, and there's other things I can prove to you, they hate me. And before I know it, I've created a whole vendetta, and that becomes machlokas, that becomes a feud, and before I know it, I'm hurting my children in the name of education. And that's not education. Education is nurturing independence. So that's the internal compass. Is what I'm doing right now helping them become independent, or is what I'm doing right now helping them become dependent? Because the worst thing I can do to a child is make them think that what they've got to do throughout their life is convince other people that they are right over everyone else. Because then they become complainers. Then they become chronic complainers about who's messing me in my life, and then how do I get back at them? How do I convince the authorities in my boss and my co-workers that so-and-so is the real wrong party, as opposed to, okay, how can I handle this in a way that's not intimidating, not incriminating, not complaining, as saving face for the co-worker or my own spouse, whoever it is that I'm interfacing with, and free up my mind from the world of analyzing and free up that space for what's a good solution. How can I know how to handle this better next time? How do I apologize in a way that you're able to accept it and it's sincere and real? So, and there's much more to touch upon. We've hit the 12:30 mark, 12:29. Any questions or comments?
So good.
What did you get from today?
All wrong.
Sorry? I'm sorry?
No, that I'm doing it all wrong. No, I'm like literally, yeah.
There's no all wrong. There's no all wrong. We're all in the same boat, and without us, our kids are still going to grow up. Please God, it will be with us. But it's never too late. Never too late. No matter what messes I'm giving you my own examples, which it cost my own kids years of trying to figure out how do I untangle this. And Yaakov Avinu was in a similar boat. Yes.
I have two questions. The first is it better to do what you said with like the two, how did you react? How did you react? I've come now to just when this one did this one did that, I say, work it out, figure it out on your own. Should I not do that? Should I have...
Good question. So, figuring it out on their own is if you want to call it the next step. That if I've given them the minimal tools of what to do next, then
I can... older, they're not like 4 or 5, they're...
Right.
Should I say that, or should I still...
So you're the best judge of that. You're the best judge, because you know which one of the two might be more prone to staying in complaint mode, because they're not finished with their resentment or anger or outrage for the injustice or unfairness of whatever it is that they are having some sort of conflict about.
Yeah.
In dealing with the younger kids, in nurturing the responsibility, the response that they have the ability to do is, I'm not interested in going down a slippery slope of generations of complaints. Because if you pull me into there, then your whole life you're going to think about who's the policeman in my world that I have to convince of right and wrong. And then it becomes a world of manipulation, a world of politics, a world of influence and who I rub shoulders with, that I've got the most leverage. everyone loses.
My second question is just regarding favoritism,
Yes.
which is still affects me at this age. Right?
Yeah.
Siblings.
Yeah.
So I'm very careful about that. But even that being said, I still get like a cash money from my kids. You spend more time with this one,
Right.
whatever. It's just like, even if I don't feel like I do,
Right.
their perception, or maybe they are right,
Right.
that I do, right?
Right.
So, what are your thoughts on that? Like, is it
Right.
very important not to spend
Right.
more time with one than the other, or like the lasting effects? And then how does, as a parent, like how do you constantly evenly divide
Right.
your time, your attention,
Excellent
like
question.
your hours between
Right.
children?
There really is no there's no such thing as equal attention, because what ends up happening is the kid that is hurting the most ends up needing the most.
Right.
Whether they're hurting academically, so then they end up getting special ed teachers and private tutors and other services sometimes. The only thing that kids can understand is when I'm sincerely honest about the quality of the time. What I mean by that is that every interface is an invitation of the smile, which we talked about last time, the smile on the face and the endearment, the happiness that comes from, I'm alone with you right now. And alone doesn't mean that there's no one else in the room. It just means that you're my entire focus at this moment. And that's actually really what the word hineni in Lashon Kodesh means. Hineni means, we translate as behold, I am. But what it means is, hineni, I exist for you. That's what hineni really means. And that means that nothing else exists right now except what you're sharing with me and my response to you. That was Avram Avinu's famous statement when Hashem told him to bring his child up as a korban oila. His answer was hineni, I exist for you. And then when Yitzhak had a question, well, we're going to this mountain to bring a sacrifice, but I don't see any sacrifice. So I see the wood and I see the knife. Where's the sacrifice? But when he first said, Abba, Father, Avram Avinu's response was hineni, I exist for you. That means right this moment you caught my attention and nothing else has my attention. So it's not even quality of time, it's really quality of attention. And that means phone is off, or if there is a distraction and I need to take the distraction, I'll tell the child, I'm going to take this call, I'm coming right back to you, you're much more important, but I need to give you my mind complete to this. And if it's sincere, the child understands, they can buy that. Anything that's sincere from a parent, children will buy. And with it, they will erase lots of mistakes. They can have, what they have a harder time is if I defend or attack, but I can't believe you said that. Who did I take out last night for pizza? Who was it amongst all the kids? Oh, was it only you? And how long was it for? When was the last time I did that for any of the others? And that I'm going to get caught in a mathematical debate of how much time I'm dividing when the kids don't, that's really not where they're coming from. It sounds like that, it sounds like it's an attack on me, and then I got to end up defending that I am a good parent. The best thing is understand it's an invitation. Every complaint is an invitation. It's an invitation of how to handle this kid. And if I mess up, it's okay. A few minutes later I can reflect on it and come back and say, no, I thought about it. It's not about the mathematics of how much time I'm spending with each kid. I understand what you're really saying is that you need more of my attention than I'm paying attention to. So let's talk about what you enjoy most when we're together and when we can do that next. The kids sincerity kids can handle. My hypocrisy is what they have a harder time with when I'm not ready to admit that I can't believe you said that, it's so unfair, and then I get into a defense position. So you're always positioned in the perfect place because kids are dying for a relationship with mom and dad, and they're dying for a real relationship, and real simply means sincere. And so you've always got a second chance. I hope that helps answer a bit. Thank you for your patience. Yeah. Please feel free to go to your next part of your schedule.
Let's say you have a boy who's like he's always the one trying to father.
Yes.
You know.
Yes.
and and every time you like say like, oh, you're always getting me in trouble, but really I know that it's the one who's like
I know that.
starting it.
Yes.
So what do you do? Like, what would you want of your parent? What would you have wanted your mother to do
Yes.
to help you have
Excellent.
there?
So in the pasuk that Shlomo Melech offers us, in if you want to call it the mission statement of chinuch, Chanuch lenar al pi darkei. So I'm loosely translate educate / train your child according to his way, her way. So the premise, the predicate in this verse is that I first know the way of the child before I can apply the chinuch, apply the training or education. So that means to say, what's the profile of this boy? What are their strengths? What are they really good at? What do they excel in? What's their favorite activity when they come home from school? Who's their best friend and what do they like playing together? What books do they enjoy reading? What type of books? What type of movies, if that's on the radar? The more answers I have to those type of questions in building the profile of who my child is, all of those are huge clues for how to enter his world and have a relationship more closely with that child in that world. So that what ends up happening, and I'm just speaking in general terms, the more this kid sees I'm in their world and interested in their world and enter their world and share a bit of their world with them, the harder it becomes for that child to do things that they know displease mom and dad. Because mom and dad are so good to me, they love me and they connect so much to me. They're not saying these words in their mind, they probably don't have the emotional vocabulary to maturely articulate that. But that's nevertheless actually what's really taking place. Those are all clues. His profile as to who he is are all clues. The getting into a fight with his sister is also a clue, because that is an invitation for me to either notice, oh my gosh, look at the fruit on this branch here, it's starting to rot. Oh, this one's overripe. And then I'm paying more and more attention to, oh, there's fungus on the root of this tree, and then I get stuck on why the tree's not perfect, as opposed to stay with what's good and that way nurture the tree. Stay with what's really good in the child. So you're the best person to know the answers to that, and then those are the clues of how to enter his world, so that he doesn't have the same need. I'm not saying the reason why he's picturing his sister is because he doesn't get enough attention from mom and dad, but it's going to be a lot less of a problem once he's got the different type of attention from mom and dad. I'm not talking about amount of time, because it's once you know that profile, you can set him up with more play dates, or get him a tutor in a particular craft or skill or musical instrument. Those are the things that become the asay toiv, keeping focused on the good, that sur mera, the bad stuff, starts to fall away on its own, because he doesn't need to go there. I won't say it's a perfect cure, but it really, it's everything my kid does is an invitation. Sur mera, do I get stuck in, get rid of the bad in him? Or asay toiv, get stuck, obsessed by what's good about this kid, and keep building on that, so that the kid really feels like, oh my gosh, you do anything for me in my world.
Thank you.
Welcome.
That's so good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Enjoy Tu B'Shvat.
Yeah. And maybe that's why he connects, like he listens to my husband like this, but if me, nothing, but they learn together, they do sports together, like
Interesting.
I don't,
He's a boy. It's
I
easier.
don't have that.
Right.
So with me, it's like, only if I'm like, I'm gonna tell Daddy, it's like, okay, now I'll listen. But I do the same things as him, like
So
okay.
it's true that he has an unfair advantage in that sense, but it won't take away from you coming up with what he likes and figuring out how that can apply in your interfacing with him.
Can I say something that I just read on the, like, I'm gonna tell Daddy, because, like, they're usually more attuned to, like, the kids listening to them. I read that it takes away our control of authority over them, and they know they don't have to listen to us, so I try never to say that again. Meaning, it makes you seem like, yeah, you're enabling them to see you co-op all over me. I just read this literally the other day. I'm not saying it as a criticism. I do it all the time, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to stop saying that, because I'm literally telling them, yeah, I don't punish you well. Or if that's the case, or I can't handle you, or yeah, walk all over me because daddy's not here right now, you know? I don't know, just, it goes much deeper than that, but just, I gave you that. It doesn't balance it doesn't balance what they see from their mother and father. Is like more of the background of that. Like, they see you as weak and the other one is stronger.
Right.
Does that make sense? I'm trying to give it over.
I also, just like with getting sucked into the power struggle, I just like always neutrally tell my kid, like, cause that's not fair, but I took you out, like, I'm not rationalizing with you.
Right.
This is not a logical
Right.
conversation. I actually say you're right, like, it's not about equal and fair because you're all different. And I always kind of just say, like, every child is different, you each get what you need at a different time, and it's not fair and it's not always equal, and I kind of just, yeah, like, I would be annoyed too, but, and I'm not even going a step farther and saying, and when this happened to you, look how I gave that to you, and they did,
Right.
but I'm not even contextualizing, like, they're just stuck in, like,
Right.
this, and it's just like,
Right.
we're moving past it, I'm not, like, getting into I'm validating it, and I'm empathizing, but I'm not getting swept into the big emotional, it's just so draining.
Right.
It's like, it really, every interaction becomes that.
But then what happens because like the neediest one usually does get the most attention, right? And I'm just speaking from years later.
Right.
The neediest sibling, whether it be, emotional, financial as the child gets older, that ends up getting the most attention from the parent.
Right.
And then that becomes like the focus of the parent versus the other sibling.
Right.
And that creates like resentment from the other sibling, whatever. And also, for when you give to the most, you become close. So it's like this cycle between the parent and the child with the neediest child to the, distance of the other children.
Right.
So how do you, like, come to terms with that, break that, like, as a sibling, as a parent, like, what do you do? Especially if you do need, let's say there is a needy child, you do need that, but then you don't want to create, like, discord amongst the siblings, over connection between one child and the other, it all kind of gets wrapped up into like a bigger picture, long term.
Right. So until they're married and out of the house, it's kind of an endless juggle, and then there's a whole new juggle
Well, even
of
once they're
how
out of the
not
house.
to be favoritism over which grandchildren of which
Yes.
children, etc.
Right.
So it's unending.
Yeah.
The good news is it only goes till 120 years. After that,
Right.
Gets a lot easier.
It is. Even with the grandchildren, right? This one needs more, right?
Right.
And then
So-
that creates another generation of
right.
this.
I don't believe there's a yes/no answer. I only know that there's the same compass needle of what's pointing in the direction of nurturing independence is what's going to help answer the question. So if I've got kids who actually do need more attention from me, then I'm going to figure out how do I carve out time so that it's I don't like using the term quality time because I think all time spent with kids is supposed to be an interface of quality. But how do I carve out so that all my children actually do experience a mum in their world, dad in their world, on a very personal level?
Yeah.
So the answer to that is really going back to the same question: what's the profile of this child? What are the strengths Hashem's given the child? The particular gifts that the child is good at, whether it's writing, whether it's art, whether it doesn't make a difference. They're all clues. I can go to a museum. I can go to, let's say, the Living Tongue Museum. This kid loves coins. Go to the Living Tongue Museum and put in your hand, Rabbi Deutsch of the Living Tongue Museum, he'll put in your hand coins of 2,000 years ago, a shekel from the time of the Bai Sheni. Get books on the subject, read it with the kid. There's so much that I can do once I just even have 2 or 3 clues. That's all I need to enter that world. Or if they're very young, the advantages are huge because you get to choose which books to read to your child. I started reading to my youngest kid at 2 years old. I realized I started way too late. I was waiting till the kids could read till I would read to them. It was ridiculous. Read before they know what a letter is. That particular kid is the best reader in all my family, and ended up, it's interesting, I read him Tintin, The Adventures of Tintin. I love them. So they're so really, really good. It's completely clean. And what was interesting to me is that he didn't teach himself 2 other languages, but he became familiar with German and French, and then later on Hebrew, because he knew Baal Peh, he knew by heart every single one of the 24 volumes of the Adventures of Tintin. And so he ended up buying them in other languages because he knew what the captions were in English. So he was translating into, so he taught himself French terminology and German and then Hebrew. So, but it's so interesting when you go into the world of the child and you open up their mind, they can take it from there. That same kid happens to be the most artistic of all my children, and I believe it's because Hergé, who is the author and the illustrator of The Adventures of Tintin, he paid extraordinary attention to detail. You look at every single caption of his cartoons. He is the precursor of the Hulk and all the cartoon magazines, but they're very, very intelligently illustrated, and the attention to detail is really teaching the mind of the child to appreciate detail in art. So I found that interesting that he's by far the most artistic of all my kids. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you.
Okay. Great to see you.
Thank you.
Something.
Thank you. I so needed all of those.